So we are using the word encyclopedic literature in reference to Mahabharata. We are calling it as an encyclopedic book which covers many different shastras. Uh, there is a scope, for example, to conduct a workshop of this kind, say on Paka Shastra, the science of cooking in Mahabharata. There is whole thing about wrestling. There is a chapter on wrestling in Mahabharata, in Virata Parva. Wrestling is covered. There is another place where stable maintenance, horse maintenance is done. In the Virata Parva only, the Sahadeva and Nakula, they take up the job of horse maintenance. So there that science is discussed. There are many different sections of Mahabharata where different sciences are discussed. So from that point of view, we can practically see the examples of how Mahabharata has different sciences covered in that. But is it a new idea? Is it an idea coming from only Mahabharata, or the idea of covering several different fields, several different sciences there in the Veda itself, from the Veda point of view itself? In the Vedas, what is covered? As you hear from the Western interpreters, Indologists, they tell you that Vedas are the songs of the pastoral people who migrated from the northeastern part into India. So, okay, let us say, just from their point of view, even from a purely Western Indological point of view, let us consider them to be songs of pastorals, folk songs, let us say. Vedas are folk songs, let us say. What do folk songs cover? If you go to a village and collect folk songs, that's my job. Professionally, I'm a cultural anthropologist. I stay in forests and villages to study folk literature, folk songs, folk art forms, folk culture. What do these folk songs of a certain community or a certain village or a group of villages cover? They too cover everything. For example, there are folk songs which cover the material culture of the village, the pots, the craft, everything. They cover all the indigenous knowledge, all the indigenous sciences, indigenous technologies that they have, that villages' knowledge. So, do they have an idea that, okay, we are covering everything, we are encyclopedic in our coverage, we should do this? No. These whole ideas of different sciences, covering everything is all modern, educated, civilized idea. When a person does something, he does it for the sake of it. So, the villagers, when they cover different areas of their knowledge, they do it just because they want to express. They want to express everything of their life. So, because they want to express everything of their life, they cover every branch of knowledge in an indigenous way. For example, their agriculture, it is reflected in their songs. Their pottery, it is reflected in their songs. Their carpentry is reflected in their songs. So, when somebody does it that way, they do it just naturally. This whole division of knowledge into disciplines like physics, chemistry, botany, zoology and history, all this is our making, artificial making, modern making from the Western academics that we have. But for the ancients, for example, you get Aristotle, you read a biology book, nomenclature, Aristotle. Go to political science, Aristotle. Go to sociology, Aristotle. So when Aristotle's name figures in so many different areas, What do you understand? For Aristotle, did Aristotle think that, oh, now I am speaking biology, now I am speaking political science, now I am speaking sociology? No. For him, it was all philosophy. Okay. What's philosophy? Philus for Sophia. Philus is affinity. Okay. You have this word, become students. When I say some smaller, simple things, I address you people, not them, they all know it already. The philus, the word philus you find in words like nucleophile, electrophile, right? And nowadays the most used word pedophile, right? All these places you have this word philus, which is affinity. Sophia is knowledge. Okay? Philus plus Sophia, affinity for knowledge, is philosophy. We have a very similar word in the Vedic literature called Mimamsa. Mantum Ichcha Mimamsa. Ichcha is very similar to Philus. Mantum is very similar to Sophia. So, the word philosophy is very similar to the word Mimamsa. Okay. So, philosophy. So, they thought they were doing philosophy and they did everything under that umbrella. They did what we today consider to be biology is done under that. What we consider to be theatre science is done under that. What we consider to be poetics is done under that. What we today consider to be political science is also done under that rubric, under that umbrella. So, don't think that the Vedic people, the Vedic seers, Vedic mantra drashtas, rishis knew that there are different branches like biology, political science, sociology, all this, and then one rishi says, now let me cover political science, and I will now cover political science. Another one will cover, okay, you have covered political science, and now let me cover biology, and he covers biology. No, it's not like that. Just as Aristotle never thought that he was covering biology, political science, sociology, art of drama, art of painting, everything under the same rubric, when people do Philos for Sophia, just in search of knowledge, they cover everything without their knowledge. You understand how encyclopedias come? Okay? So don't think, so when people say everything is there in Vedas, sometimes trivialization happens. People trivialize things and they say, okay, you guys are saying everything is there in Vedas, this is nonsense. But everything was there in Aristotle also. Everything was there in folklore, in every folklore of every village, every community, everything is there. In the same way, in Vedas, which were, okay, let us say tribal folklore of the Vedic tribe. Even in that sense, at least, there is everything in it. You understand, ma'am? Not in the sense that they knew missiles, they knew this, they knew everything. No, not in that sense. All those which you today divide into various branches of knowledge were not divided into various branches of knowledge at that time. It was all just ocean of knowledge without drawing divisions of branches of knowledge. Katha Sarit Sagar or whatever. Those days, these disciplinary divisions were not drawn so well. So it was covered that way. At least, I am saying at least because there is much more than this Aristotle kind of covering or anything. The Vedic knowledge is much more profound. The ideas that have been expressed in Vedas are so profound. Why any other evidence? You were all singing Sahana Bhavatu, right? You were all reciting Sahana Bhavatu. Is there any book, any literature of contemporary disciplines, contemporary academics, where the idea of, okay, let teacher and student be protected together? Okay, let teacher and student enjoy together, enjoy everything of life together. let teacher and student together express the might. Let teacher and student acquire everything together. Let teacher and student not hate each other. This idea itself is it not profound? Okay, is it some song of some folklore, somebody singing? Get me one folk song from any part of the world where teacher and student relationship is discussed. Get me one folk song. Amazon songs, African, Brazilian, Mexican. Get me one song where teacher-student relationship is discussed. Can you get? I can assure you, dig for your lifetime, dig for your 300 lifetimes, you will not get it. Why Vedas are profound, more vast in their coverage is because they don't cover things, the other folk songs, if you consider them to be folk song, they don't consider these profound things like teacher-student relationship. Okay? And fire. Vedas, if you just take that Griffith's translations of Rig Veda on the net, you go Rig Veda translation by Griffith is all there in the web on the net. Just see the topics. Which topic is covered in which mantra? Agni, 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 all the time. Fire is the topic of most of the mantras. Get one folk song from any part of the world, folk songs. Fire is the topic, you tell me. Dig for your lifetime. Is fire a topic for them? Anywhere. Except the Avestan, Zoroastrian literature, which is again branch of Vedic literature only, obviously, everyone knows that. It's a Middle Indo-European language, if you want to use that technical term, it is a Middle Indo-European language. And very clearly Asura is, Ahura, Sura is, Hura, you have everything similar, Soma is Homa, you have Avestan literature, who are called Farsis, you know the word Farsis? In India we have many Farsis, Tatas are Farsis for example. There was one cricket player, Merchant, he was a Farsi. There was a famous advocate called Nani Palkiwala, Farsi. Many celebrity figures in India, Farsis. So, Farsis are well celebrated in India. You have their streets, entire street is full of Farsis in Mumbai, for example. Their temples are there, their fire temples are there. Their book is called Zind Avesta. Their supreme deity is called Ahura Mazda. And their supreme prophet, if you want to use that word, is called Zarathustra. If you read their book, where many words are also very similar to the Vedic words. So that is Vedic only, that is why you have importance of fire there. But in any other culture, you have importance of fire? My friends, my Indic friends were asking me, though who agree with me in many things, they were asking me, what is there so profound in Vedas? I want to ask all these Indic friends who ask me, what is there so profound in Vedas? The very first mantra, even from a chronological, historical point of view, from a Western point of view, is Agni Mile Purohitam. And that mantra is saying, fire is the priest. Okay. How can fire be the priest? You have fire. Okay. You put fire. Who offers Havya into the fire, he is called priest. Okay. But in this mantra they are saying, oh fire, you are the priest. Okay. How can that idea be there, fire being priest? Unless you understand fire as energy working in all the entities of the world, how fire communicates, how Agnimukha Vaidevaha can be true, unless you understand fire being priest to be profound idea, you will not be able to understand how fire can be priest. These Indic friends who tell me, they are also like me, they have the same ideology, but they keep saying, what is there in Vedas? It is just some pastoral material, they are all kings, they are the real kings and their wars are described in that, and there are no profound scientific ideas in Vedas. But the very first mantra is saying that fire is the priest. How can fire be the priest? Only science students can understand. Before BCom, were you science students? Not even in BCom? 10th? 10th science was there? Up to 10th standard you studied science and you studied that atoms have electrons. Atoms have electrons in them? Electrons, protons, neutrons. In Malayalam script also they call it electron only. They call it proton only, they call it neutron only. Only atom they might have called Anu or Paramanu or Kana or something like that. Anu, Anu. In Anu there is electron, there is proton, there is neutron. They are all particles of energy, packets of energy. Right? Each packet is called quantum. Maybe some other word in Malayalam, I do not know what it is. But that quantum of energy, electrons stay at that quantum of energy as long as they are part of atom of an element. But if they are excited, if they are given a kick, they get elevated to higher levels of, higher amounts of packets of energy, and sometimes they are kicked out of the atom. All this, whatever is happening, there is fire. The word fire is not being used as the flames, red flames, blue flames, green flames. No. The word fire is being used as tejas, in the sense of tejas, energy. So that energy which is in the form of enthalpy, heat content, internal energy of all the materials, that is in exothermic reactions, it comes out, in endothermic reactions, it gets in, and it is the fire which is passing through all the materials during all chemical reactions. So, because it is the operating entity, it is fire is the one through which everything is happening, it is being called as Purohita, priest. Is that not profound enough? Is that not, just to say Agnimile Purohitam itself is amazing, shocking, slap on the face of people who say that there is nothing profound in the Vedas. The very first line is a slap. Because unless somebody is mad, he cannot call a non-living entity like bag a man. Right? So, oh man, how handsome you are. If I am saying to this bag, obviously I will be put in an asylum. Right? But if I am saying fire, you are the priest. There are only two options. Either I have to be put in an asylum, or I should be taken seriously. If I am taken seriously, I should be understood differently. I should be understood differently. So, if I am understood differently, how I should be understood? I should be understood in terms of enthalpy, internal energy, exothermic reactions, endothermic reactions, heat passing through objects. Heat is the operating entity. That way only it can be Agnimile Purohitam. There are only two options. Okay, so Agnimile Purohitam has to be a statement of a madman, or it has to be statement of a scientist. Okay, it is the statement of a scientist. Okay, so take every Vedic mantra. If you see the statements inside, if you want to understand them not to be statements of some madman, you have to understand them to be statements of scientists only, then you will begin to understand that they are covering profound ideas which are not covered in any other tribal song or folk song. When I say that Vedas are also tribal songs or folk songs of the Vedic tribe, some traditional people might get offended saying, oh, Vedic people are tribes. I just begin with that, just for the sake of argument. And then I say that, okay, tribal songs, okay, folk songs, but which folk song, which tribal song has this content and this amount of profundity and this amount of depth of knowledge, depth of understanding? That is the reason why Vedas are considered to be yeah.
But then again, our traditional, let's call them traditionalists, they think I'm trivializing the line of the Vedas.
Yeah. So, whatever they think, the point is, the point I am saying is, when I say there is nothing profound in the Vedas, whom I had in mind, Nilesh ji, recently on the Indic list, in the mailing list, there were mails from very respectable persons who were in favor of doing history from Vedas. Wonderful. I am not opposed to doing history from Vedas. But the same scholars, they repeatedly say there is nothing more profound in the Vedas than just documenting history. That is where I am coming from. So, actually I am addressing them. They are not there in the audience, but you might encounter them at any point. They might tell you that there is nothing profound in the Vedas. Everything that you find in the Vedas, right from the first mantra to every mantra that you see, there is a Yajurveda mantra which says, look at the earth. It is Varunasya Nabhihi. It is the navel of a divinity called Varuna. If you study Vedas deeper and deeper, then you will begin to understand that Varuna is something like gravitational force. A force which is centrifugal. A centrifugal force is being called Varuna, and there are Varuna Pashas, lines of force of this gravitational like. It's not exactly gravitational like force, which is towards sleep, which is towards rest, which is towards death, is called Varuna. And we have the word Varuna Pashas, all these Pashas. Pasha is, in Tamil and Malayalam, you have this word Pasham, right? So, for love and affection and all that. So, that is, they are threads, ropes. So, that Varuna Pashas are lines of force of that entity, which is centrifugal force. And the Nabhihi is a beautiful word for center of anything, center of gravity, centroid, orthocenter, any other kind of center kind of words that we have in mathematics. Nabhi is a beautiful word. So, Varunasya Nabhihi, the earth is one of the Varunasya Nabhihi. In mantras, if you go, at some other point they say, Aditya is Varunasya Nabhihi. Vasu is Varunasya Nabhi. Any astronomical entity hanging in the astronomical space is being called Varunasya Nabhi, because it is the gravitational balances that are keeping all these astronomical entities hanging there. And this mantra in Yajurveda, it is saying that Artida Varunasya Nabhi, leave it alone. Then the next statement says, it is like a cloud hanging in the space. It is like a child sleeping on the lap of her mother. Oh, my friends, humans, don't hurt her. Don't damage her. Let her, please leave her alone. Let her sleep. How beautiful. The earth. Nowadays we are saying, don't disturb the earth, don't affect the earth. Who are saying? Environmentalists. naturalists, nature-friendly people. They say, don't dig it, don't run trains on it, don't construct hydroelectric projects, don't do that, don't disturb the earth. This mantra is saying, oh, how beautifully she is hanging like a cloud in the space, like a child in the mother's lap. And another amazing thing is, she is Varunasya Maya. They say she is Varunasya Maya because she is changing colors all the time. How is she changing colors? Can anyone sitting on the earth itself can say that it is changing colors? Only when you go up in the space, you will be able to see it from outside and say that it is changing colors all the time, right? In this mantra it is said that she is changing colors every moment. It is Varunasya Maya. It is happening because of the illusionary trick being played by Varuna. As if someone has seen it from outside. Right? Or are these things not profound? You understand what I am saying? Can there be a folk song from any part of the world, from any tribe, any village, which can describe the earth as Varunasya Nabhi or Varunasya Maya? Okay? Buddhanaha is a Shishu. It says the earth is a Shishu, it's a baby. It's hanging. Okay? So, let me tell you friends, I am bringing these examples just to say that Veda, it's a scope of topics. These are profound topics. Don't think that they are some pastoral songs sung by some shepherds, cowherds coming from northwest. So a shepherd need not be interested in the earth hanging in space. A shepherd need not be interested in the fire. Why should a pastoral person be interested in fire all the time? Fire, fire, fire. Okay? If you just see Griffith's translation, you young children, you go onto the web and look for Rigveda, just Rigveda, the first, because they have done very good SEO, search engine optimization. Immediately if you say Rigveda, Griffith comes. And you go to Griffith's translation, there is a list, and the list of topics is Agni, Agni, Agni all the time. Why should a shepherd or a cowherd be interested in fire? You just look at it. Then you understand how many topics have been covered, how vast the scope is. Now, encyclopedia, the word itself is an English word. We have borrowed it from English into Indian languages. So it's a Western modern concept, encyclopedia. Why to compose encyclopedias, why to keep them as reference books in the libraries? It's a modern concept. But when somebody says that Vedas are encyclopedic, they consider that to be bad. Encyclopedic literature, there is one literature professor from Princeton University, New Jersey, United States, called Northrop Frye. He is a professor of comparative literature and English literature. He composed a book called Anatomy of Criticism. One of the hats on my head is literature, poetics, aesthetics. So, my PhD started with Northrop Frye's book, Anatomy of Criticism. And in that book, Anatomy of Criticism, there is a section called Encyclopedic Literature. He says in that book, while discussing history of literature, how literature evolves, he says after some kinds of books specializing in certain topics are composed, gradually every nation, every community evolves a book called encyclopedic book. And in that paragraph, he says, for example, the Mahabharata of the Indians. Northrop Frye. He mentions Mahabharata as an example of encyclopedic literature. And he uses the example of python and says, like a python swallowing everything, this encyclopedic literature keeps swallowing things into itself and keeps growing and all that. That's okay. That's a different topic altogether. But he has given example of Mahabharata for encyclopedic literature, the concept that he evolved as a part of analysis of history of literature, Northrop Frye. It's not me. And Veda, its self-consciousness and meta-Vedic mantras, I have already talked about it. Veda talks about itself. For the benefit of the younger children, let me tell you, Vedas have 2-3 parts. Okay? Are you noting? Mantras, the basic core Veda, that is called mantra. Okay? There are Brahmanas and Aranyakas. Okay? Brahmanas and Aranyakas are that section of Veda which discuss these mantras. Okay? Technically, Brahmanas and Aranyakas are also considered to be part of Veda only. They are also called as Shruti only. They also come from Rishis only. But they discuss the Veda. Okay? And the later disciplines like Mimamsa and Vedanta, they have their seeds in Brahmanas and Aranyakas. Okay? Those sections of Brahmanas which discuss the mantras from Yajna point of view, ritual point of view, and Dharma point of view, they led to Mimamsa. Jaimini gathered all these ideas from Brahmanas and Aranyakas and composed the sutras called Jaimini Sutras, Mimamsa Sutras. Okay. Then there are the other sections of these Brahmanas and Aranyakas which are called Upanishads. Your teachers don't tell you in the school. Your teachers in the college, they don't tell you that Upanishads are part of Brahmanas and Aranyakas only. There is, usually in many textbooks wrongly, they say mantra, Brahmana, Aranyaka and fourth as Upanishads. There is nothing like that. There is no Upanishad which is apart from Brahmanas and Aranyakas. Every Upanishad is either part of Brahmana or Aranyaka only. So those sections of Brahmanas and Aranyakas which discuss the mantras from the moksha point of view, they were called Vedanta or Upanishads. Okay. So Badarayana or Vyasa gathered these portions of Brahmanas and Aranyakas and he composed his sutras which are called Vedanta Sutras or Brahma Sutras. So Jaimini and Badarayana, these two are gathering two kinds of discussions from Brahmanas and Aranyakas. They are composing two kinds of sutras. They are called Purva Mimamsa Sutras. Mimamsa Sutras are also called as Purva Mimamsa Sutras, Jaimini Sutras. And the other part, the Vedanta Sutras or Brahma Sutras are called Uttara Mimamsa Sutras. They are focused on moksha and the concept of Brahman. The Jaimini Sutras begin with Athato Dharma Jignasa. They talk about Dharma. And the Vedanta Sutras begin with Athato Brahma Jignasa. So Brahma is the concept. So Brahma here, Dharma here are the two central concepts for Mimamsa and Vedanta. So because Brahmanas and Aranyakas are also Veda, they are discussing Veda only. We are saying Vedas are self-conscious. Why we call Vedic tradition as self-conscious tradition is, Vedic tradition discusses itself. Whenever something discusses itself, that part which discusses itself is called meta. For example, my professor who taught me cultural anthropology, Professor Alan Dendis, he coined a word called meta folklore. Okay, folklore of a community that discusses its own folklore is called meta folklore. Folk songs discuss folk songs. Folk narratives discuss folk narratives. So, folk narratives, discussing folk narratives are called meta narratives. Narrative about narrative. Song about song, they are called meta. So, Brahmanas and Aranyakas are meta Veda. Meta Veda in the sense they are Veda about Veda. Okay. No, absolutely no. The word Aranyaka has nothing to do with the focus on forest. The word comes from the dwellings of the rishis. They were staying in Aranya, that is, the composers were Aranya people forest. That is why they are called. And the Brahmanas are also so called because the individuals were focused on Brahman. So the individuals were called Brahmana. Because they were composed by them, they are called Brahmanas. Okay. So that is nothing, topic is not Aranya. Okay. So now, remember all of you, keep repeating in all the forums that you speak, everywhere that you write, that Vedic tradition, in the Vedas, in the Itihasas, in the Puranas, it is a self-conscious tradition. It talks about itself. If you want a definition of mantra, there are mantras giving definition of mantra. What is mantra? Mantra tells you. Don't go to Michael Witzel for the definition of mantra. The guy knows nothing about mantra. Mantra tells you what mantra is. You understand? That is the beauty. Not only Vedas. Actually, my professor who taught me cultural anthropology, he is talking about folklore of the whole world. All folklore all over the world has this meta folklore. It talks about itself. If you go to a Malayalam community, Kerala community, some tribal community of Kerala, they have songs about the songs of that community. They have stories about the stories of that community. They are called meta. You understand? So in the same way Vedas also have. So what is the best way to understand that community of Kerala? Talk to them. How to talk to them? Interview them, do research the way I do. I go, do field work, I do ethnography, I do interviews. Apart from that, their own texts give you information. Their own texts give you understanding of their texts. That is the insider's understanding. Okay? In anthropology, they use the word emic understanding. E-M-I-C. E-M-I-C. Emic understanding, insider's understanding. But we do analysis from outside, that is called etic understanding. E-T-I-C, etic understanding. For example, they sing a song, I call it song. Song is an etic concept. Because song is an English word. What is meant by song for English people is song for them. But if I go and, for example, to this Kerala Malayalam community, tribal community there, and say, oh, you are singing a song, then they say, song illa. Part. Okay, so it is not song, it is part. Part is the insider's idea. They do theatre. They do some kind of theatre-like thing. For example, they do Teyyam. In Teyyam, Bhagavati and Teyyam fight with each other, right? And then I say, oh, it was a good drama. He will come and slap me. He says, no, drama ille. Right? Drama ille Teyyam da. Right? It is Teyyam only. It is not drama. You understand what I am saying? That Teyyam only, it's not drama, is emic understanding. To call it drama is etic understanding. We use different words, drama, and we also say dance. We say Teyyam, good dance. Then that Kudiyattam Chekkilar comes and says, dance illa. Kudiyattam. Kudiyattam is not dance. And if somebody does some Western movement while doing Kudiyattam, he says, you are doing dance. No, don't do dance. You have to do Kudiyattam only. You have to do Kathakali only. It's not, you should not do dance. But from us, from our point of view, we call dance. You are doing dance. For them, it's not dance. For them, it's not drama. For them, it is not song. All our words are imposed from our side. These are etic perspectives. We are imposing our ideas on them. Their ideas are insiders' ideas, emic ideas. Okay. So how to understand which is better? To understand from etic perspective or from emic perspective? If you have a respect for the culture that you are studying, you will be a cultural relativist. We use the word cultural relativism. What is meant by cultural relativism is to say that each culture is valid and respectable in itself. It has to be measured from its own perspective, from the insider's perspective. That is called cultural relativism. Okay? And why is ethic done? It's also good. It's also required because you have to understand that culture from your own known, what you know already from that point of view, you understand, and you communicate to people, your audience or Western audience. For example, when you talk about Kathakali or Kudiyattam, you'll have to say, it's a kind of dance. Okay, to begin with, it's okay. But gradually, you should take them saying, in the beginning, I had to use the word dance for want of a better word, but gradually, you should understand that it is not dance. Kudiyattam is Kudiyattam only. It has got a different perspective. It's not dance. It's not, Teyyam is not a drama. It's Teyyam. Teyyam is Teyyam. So it has its own perspective. Okay? So that is called cultural relativist understanding. That is, respect the insider. If an artist draws an art, you impose your own ideas and say, okay, I understand it this way, and that's my idea. Our friend D.P. Patnaik, he called My Gita. He wrote a book recently called My Gita. So everyone writes his own, My Mahabharata, My Bhagavata. Painters are offended. Are you not, ma'am? If you paint and I come and tell you that, oh, I understand it in my own way, are you not offended? Of course, you are. So, you cannot leave some painting and take your own meaning. Everyone takes it for his own meaning or her own meaning. It's not possible. You have to understand the book from the insider's perspective, with a cultural relativist respect for the culture and its insiders. Right? Artistic freedom. Artistic freedom is freedom to paint the way you want to paint. Yeah, it is his artistic freedom. I am talking about critical freedom. Critics' freedom. Does critique, for example, if there is critics' freedom, who vandalized Hussein's paintings were right. They had the critics' freedom. You understand? But we tell them, no, don't vandalize Hussein's paintings because Hussein has his own ideas. Okay? You understand? So there is a book, there is a painting, there is a creation. You have to understand from the insider's perspective. If the insider's perspective also is against you, then there is a problem. In the case of Hussein, even the insider's perspective was antagonistic to the Hindu perspective. That is why they were antagonistic to him. That's a different matter. But first of all, respect the creator. Respect the insider. That is cultural relativism. In cultural anthropology, it is respected all over. All cultural anthropologists like to be cultural relativists. They want to understand the emic perspectives. From insiders' perspective, they want to understand things. So, Vedas have this insider's perspective documented as part of them. They are self-conscious. So, Mahabharata is also self-conscious from that point of view. So, Veda itself self-conscious, and there are meta-Vedic mantras in Brahmanas and Aranyakas. Interestingly, the core mantras themselves are self-conscious mantras also. Mahabharata itself self-conscious as part of self-consciousness of body of Itihasa and Purana. Mahabharata itself is self-conscious. This was also discussed by many scholars when Vishwa Adluri, Professor Vishwa Adluri, actually in this workshop he was expected to be there, but because of some health problem in his vocal cords, he had to return back to United States. That's why he is not here. In his articles on Mahabharata, which are nowadays making sensation all over, he used the word Mahabharata is a self-conscious book. Again, debate from the Indic friends only. How is Mahabharata self-conscious? This is how Mahabharata is self-conscious. Just like Vedas, which talk about themselves, Mahabharata is also self-conscious, because the very beginning of Mahabharata says, Mahabharata is this. Okay, Mahabharata is encyclopedic, is mentioned by Mahabharata itself. No one else. Mahabharata says, I am encyclopedic. Okay, and Mahabharata says, I discuss this, I have this. The very first portion, the Pitika portion of Mahabharata says, this is an Upabrahmana of Veda. This is being done for this reason. So, what Mahabharata is there in Mahabharata. Do you all know what Swarga is? Swarga? How many of you know Swarga? Word Swarga. You have not been there. Okay. I know. the word Swarga. Just the idea of Swarga. All of you know, right? Okay. They say that there are Apsarasas in Swarga. A 5-year-old boy dies. Unfortunately, it should not happen, but it happens. Part of nature. He goes there. The Apsarasas dance in front of him. What does he say? Apsarasas dance in front of him. What does he say? Akka, why are you doing this? Why are you dancing like this? No? What pleasure does he get? Right? Okay. Professor goes, he dies and goes there. Apsarasas come and dance. This fellow just watches, stares at them and says, what is all this? Why are you dancing in front of me? Right? So, what it means is that Swarga of each person is designed in a different way. The child's Swarga has ice cream in it, chocolates in it, all toys. Professor's Swarga has got library. There is full of books there. Right? A drunkard's Swarga has all wine shops, bars. You understand what I am saying? Swarga has no single design. It has got several designs. That is what is meant by Kalpavriksha. Swarga has Kalpavriksha means Swarga is different from different people, for different people. Okay? For children it is different, for a professor it is different, everyone is different. Mahabharata in the Pitika says, Mahabharata is a Kalpavriksha. What does it mean? Each reader gets what he wants from Mahabharata. When people read Mahabharata, they read it from their own perspective. That is why it is called Kalpavriksha. It is called Parijata. In Mahabharata, in the Swarga design in Puranas, they say there is Kalpavriksha, there is Kamadhenu, there is Chintamani, there is Vichyaishrava, there is Airavata. All of them are wish things only. Wish elephant is called Airavata. Wish horse is called Vichyaishrava. Wish jam is called Chintamani. Wish tree is called Kalpavriksha. Wish cow is called Kamadhenu. It just means that Swarga is everything for everyone. Whatever they want, they get. Whatever is pleasurable for them, they get in Swarga. In the same way, Mahabharata is also called as Parijata Vriksha, which is also a wish tree. It has got everything in it. So, encyclopedic not in the sense that there is a chapter on this, there is a chapter here. Just as in encyclopedia, there are entries in Mahabharata on comb. There is a comb entry in Mahabharata. No, there is no comb entry in Mahabharata. Combing comb. There is no such comb entry in Mahabharata. Mahabharata itself, that section, that shloka, that verse itself is a Parijata Vriksha. It is everything for everyone. Whichever reader wants to take whatever meaning he can take. For example, there are Mahabharata Rahasya Prakasha books which interpret Mahabharata as a psychology of Tantra. For example, they say Mahabharata is not actually a war. Pandavas are our five senses. Five senses, five Pandavas. Five senses, when controlled, are Pandavas, and the desires, when they are not controlled, they are 100 Kauravas. So, the desires which are uncontrolled, 100 desires, and the controlled five senses are always in war with each other. This war between controlled five senses and uncontrolled 100 Kauravas is always taking place in your heart. That is Mahabharata. That interpretation is there. Mahabharata Rahasya Prakasha, they call it. They, in such books, they give that interpretation. There are other people who say Mahabharata, actually Madhva, the Madhvacharya, who is the founder of Dvaita, he says Mahabharata is all about Bhimasena. Mahabharata is not about anything else, it is about Bhimasena. Who is Bhimasena? He is Vayuputra. What is Vayuputra? According to Madhva philosophy, he is Jivottama. Who is Sarvottama? Krishna. Sarvottama and Jivottama. Vayu Jivottama, Hari Sarvottama is the Madhva philosophy. Okay, so they say Mahabharata is all about how Sarvottama and Jivottama are interacting with each other. That is what Madhva, in his Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya, there is a book called Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya by Madhvacharya, Ananda Tirtha. Madhvacharya is also called as Ananda Tirtha. Purna Prajna. He wrote this book, Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya. In that book, he shows how Mahabharata is all about the Mukhya Prana concept. Mukhya Prana is Jivottama and Sarvottama Hari, how they interacted and how they organized the whole universe. That is what it is. He shows the book that way. So there are wonderful multiple interpretations of Mahabharata which take many things from the same book. So it's an encyclopedia not because it has got dictionary entries. Okay, one entry on comb, one entry on shoes, one entry on spectacles, nothing of that sort. It can give you several levels of meaning. It is a Parijata, you can take everything from it, the way you want. From the reader's perspective, several different meanings can be taken. This is explained by Mahabharata itself, in the Pithika part and in many parts. Enne hasti, the phrase that is frequently quoted, it is inside the Mahabharata only. Mahabharata is saying, Mahabharata itself is saying that whatever is there in the world is here, whatever is not there here is not there anywhere in the world. It is already mentioned inside Mahabharata only. That is what is called as self-consciousness. By self-consciousness we mean that the book itself talks about the book. Okay, so evidences for Mahabharata's encyclopedic qualities is the last bullet that we have here. I told you already that there are different contexts. Brihannala, Arjuna turns into Brihannala, transvestite, and goes to teach in Virata Parva, goes to teach Uttara, the daughter of the king of Matsya Rajya, Virata. There he says, "Sir, I can teach various dance forms to your daughter." Then he lists what are those dance forms. What are the different aspects of dance that he can teach. And whenever the interaction between Uttara and Arjuna is discussed, those dance issues are again discussed. Virata Parva begins with the episode of a wrestler coming into the court of Virata, Matsya Raja, and he challenges everyone there. And Dharmaraja is sitting, Yudhishthira is sitting there in the court. No one responds in the court to the challenge of the wrestler. Yudhishthira says, we have our cook here. He is Bhimasena actually. He says, he was doing wrestling for Pandavas earlier, we can invite him. And the wrestler, Bhima comes there, Bhimasena comes and fights with the wrestler. While discussing how the two wrestlers were wrestling, all the details of the technique of wrestling are discussed. With which technique they were fighting, they are discussed there. So, go to any place, these things are discussed. These wrestling, cooking, horse maintenance, everything. Actually, people talk about Mitanni document, a document from Syria of Mitanni dynasty. You know dynasties, kings' lineages. Like that, there is a dynasty called Mitanni, which was in Syria. They were actually documenting in their own language, that Mitanni language only, but as part of it, some Sanskrit words rolled in that. And the document that is discussed is in the form of tablets there. The topic of that document is horse maintenance, how to maintain horses. So, they say that these Vedic people were all horse people all the time. They were pastorals, but they were riding on horses to rear their cows. Beautiful pictures. You must read these Vaishnavas, Michael Witzel and all others. When they talk about the migration of the Vedic people from northwest to India, they are very good novelists. They have beautiful fictitious pictures of how they were coming on horses and they were rearing cows and all that. And as part of their novel, they talk about horses. And they say Mitanni document is talking about horses, which is a typical Aryan feature. Okay, our Aryans, Nakula and Sahadeva, they documented horse maintenance as part of Mahabharata. So, there are many other such topics, these are evidences. Now, the other topic is whether Mahabharata is Katha and Shastra. Professor Ji was saying that he is interested in Artha Shastra. Artha Shastra is Shastra, right? But let me give you a piece of information that you might be interested in. Panchatantra is Artha Shastra. You all know Panchatantra? The author of Panchatantra is, author of Arthashastra is Vishnugupta. Vishnugupta and Vishnu Sharma were colleagues in the university, in the Takshashila University. Both were professors in the same political science department, public administration department. Those days, political science and public administration were not separated, they were together, they were professors there. This Vishnugupta said, let me show my Kamal, I will take somebody in the street and make him an emperor using my knowledge of political science and public administration. Is there a professor in the contemporary times who challenged it this way and brought a person from the street and made a king? Vishnugupta did it. Then Vishnu Sharma said, I will show my Kamal by making folk tales speak public administration. Is there any experiment in this whole world? Show me one university professor of public administration who made 5 techniques of public administration. All Pancha Tantra, 5 tantras. Tantra means technique. 5 techniques. The book itself, the name of the book itself is 5 techniques. And these 5 techniques are public administration techniques. How do you know? They were taught to kings, princes. These princes, according to the story of the origin of the book, were great hunters. And hunting became a vice for them, V-I-C-E, vice. They were addicted to hunting. And their father was so worried that These guys are so much addicted to hunting that they do not know anything about administration, and he invited teacher after teacher to teach them administration. Finally, he was so frustrated, disappointed, that he announced that he would give half of his kingdom to a teacher who can teach administration to his sons. That story apart, okay, let us agree with the story and think that Vishnu Sharma went there, but can Vishnu Sharma go there for half kingdom? Did he take half kingdom there? No. It was a professorial challenge that he took up. He thought, if I am a good teacher, I should be able to teach to these stupids. I should be able to teach the princes who are addicted to hunting. And those who are addicted to hunting, all they know is about animals, animals, animals all the time. They have studied animals very well. So he used animal tales, which are part of folk tales all over the world. And he used only animal tales to teach public administration. Nowhere else in the world is there such an experiment of pedagogy, of using folk tales to teach a professional discipline called public administration. This is done in Panchatantra. So now, what is Katha, what is Shastra? Artha Shastra is Shastra, Panchatantra is Katha. Okay? Same material, same subject, public administration is taught as Shastra in Artha Shastra, as Katha in Panchatantra. These two are two modes of communicating the same subject. But narrative literature means books like Mahabharata, Ramayana, Bhagavata, Itihasas and Puranas, these are all narrative literature, stories. They have an aspect called information giving. They give information, they are educational, they are used for educational purposes, like Panchatantra. Panchatantra is an educational book. It was used for education, it was a pedagogical book. So, all the Itihasas and Puranas were also used as educational material, they were used as pedagogical material. There was no other tool of pedagogy those days. For example, they did not have a physics textbook or chemistry textbook or any other textbook. They say, I studied. What did you study? Itihasas and Puranas. What are Itihasas and Puranas? Just stories. What do you get from them? But by studying Itihasas and Puranas, they used to turn into professionals and scholars in various aspects of theory and practice. Itihasas and Puranas themselves were textbooks, pedagogical tools for teaching various disciplines for them. It really happened those days. I have evidences from other kavyas where a character in the kavya says, I have studied. What did you study? Itihasas and Puranas. Is that enough? Come, anyone debate with me in any science. From my knowledge of Itihasas and Puranas, I can debate with you, that character says, and he shows. He defeats all other people. Just from the knowledge of Itihasas and Puranas, he commands all the subjects. They were educational tools. And did they know that they were using it for education? Evidences are Vyavahara Vide. That word is there if you want the spelling. Vyavahara Vide. Kavya Prayojanas are discussed in Alankara Shastra. Among the Kavya Prayojanas, they said Vyavahara knowledge, that is knowledge of the ways of the world, is also one of the Prayojanas, one of the purposes, uses of Kavyas, literature, narrative literature. Yasase, Arthakrute, Vyavahara Vide, Shivetara Kshataye, Sadyah Para Nirvritaye, Kanta Sammitataya, Upadesha Yuje, all these they list as the Prayojanas of Kavya. In that list, Vyavahara Vide is also there. Why do you read? For gaining knowledge of things. I don't know whether these children are reading novels. Do you read novels? Malayalam only. But reading novels, do you read? If you ask any girl or a boy, girls only read most novels, not boys. When they read, if you ask them, why do you read? I want to know the ways of the world. How boys cheat girls, how girls cheat boys, how proposals are made, how breakups are done. Actually, how to trap a rich boy or how to trap a rich girl. So much of knowledge that Chetan Bhagat gives you, right? They use the word chicklit for all this because girls are called chicks. And lit is literature, chicklit. Chetan Bhagat writes all that chicklit. So when people read novels, they say we are gaining knowledge of ways of the world. Vyavahara vide. People themselves are saying, for Vyavahara knowledge we are doing this. Panchatantra, what does it teach you? Ways of the world. Whatever book you read. And in Richakatikam, there is a famous play of 1st century AD by Shudraka. In the very beginning, he says, I am writing this book to make people know about Kalacharitam. How villains behave, how bad people behave in the society. So all literature is saying, I am teaching you. I am giving you knowledge of ways of the world. So it's not Mahabharata that is claiming. Every book claims. Every book claims that I am giving. There are certain beautiful authors, not like Chetan Bhagat, serious people, like Arthur Haley, Evan Rand, all these people. In their serious classic novels, they cover certain aspects of life beautifully. Arthur Haley, for example, covers, there is a book called Strong Medicine, Wheels, Money Changers, all these novels, they cover each area. In Money Changers, he talks about stock markets. Wheels, he talks about auto industry. He talks about pharmaceutical industry in the Strong Medicine. They give you knowledge. And all novels, right from the days of Charles Dickens, they covered one area or the other of life. They gave you knowledge. Vyavahara vide was already there. So, literature claiming to give knowledge is not new, only Mahabharata is not doing. All literature, all over the world is claiming Vyavahara vide. So, we are not saying that Mahabharata is unique in giving knowledge of statecraft or any such thing. All literature gives. But Mahabharata gives in its own unique way. Mahabharata gives in Vedic way. Mahabharata gives in profound way. Mahabharata gives it in a very complex way, from a very early time. It is from the BC. According to Western estimates, it is 800 BC. Western estimates are always, they drag the date to recent, the most recent time. If it is possible, they tell you that Vyasa was there in 19th century also. They can drag everything as close as possible to you. So 8th century BC is their estimate. Even if you go by their own estimates, it is 8th century BC, right? So by 8th century BC, such complex and profound understanding was provided by a book from a Vedic perspective is what we are claiming. We are not claiming that only Mahabharata gives this kind of knowledge. All literature gives you. All narrative literature gives you. And if you read some novels and short stories, you get bored because the author begins by saying, actually, the guy was walking across Howrah Bridge. Bridges are constructed in several different ways. And there is civil engineering class. He gives you what kinds of cements are used, what kinds of beams are used, what kinds of steel are used. And then he comes to the story back and says, then the person was walking. You throw this book away saying, am I reading it for civil engineering? These are essay-like storybooks. These essay-like storybooks are the most boring books. There are many authors who do this. We don't like such books. So, I am using the word Shastra bias. Essay-like narrations, they are slipping on the balance beam. While walking on the balance beam, on the information side they are slipping. And if you go to Katha bias, there is no informative section. This is another kind of slip. There is pure narration, then that is also not interesting. You want some kind of explanation here and there, some kind of knowledge giving sections and all that. That's another bias. But if you want to balance, then what you do is you have explanatory sections of the book, you have indirectly providing information from the story itself. From the message of the story, you gain knowledge. Indirectly, the information is being provided. So, this indirect way of communicating is called dhvani for the BCom students. DHVANI, dhvani in Sanskrit means indirect communication, suggestive communication. Suggestive communication or indirect communication or subtle communication is called dhvani. Okay? So, this vyavahara jnana, that is ways of the world, knowledge of ways of the world or information or shastra, is communicated through dhvani, through subtle communication, through the story. By what the character does, we understand that this is statecraft. This is how governments are to be run. By the example of a character, by the example of what they do, we understand, oh, this guy who is a respectable character like Krishna or Yudhishthira, they did it like this. So now I understand that statecraft has to be like this. Governance has to be done by this way. The author is not telling you do it like this. That is called dhvani section. Okay? Then the vachya section. There are sections, vachya means directly telling, not in a subtle way. Directly telling is called vachya way of saying. Okay? There is a guest in your house, you want to send him away, you have other work, right? So you don't tell him, hey, please go, I have other work. You just call your other family members and say, oh, are you serving food? Okay, I am coming. Indirectly telling this guy to leave. This technique is called dhvani. Okay. But if you are saying, hey, we have other work, you please go to the guest, that is called vachya. Vachya, dhvani, among these two, which is more civilized? Dhvani is more civilized. Subtle communication is more civilized communication. You cannot communicate through vachya. A person is newly married, you visit his house, and your other friend is keeping on talking, then you tell him, hey, they are newly married, let us leave. This fellow doesn't understand. He says, okay, they are newly married, why should I leave? What is he not understanding? What is he not understanding? Tell me. Dhvani. He is not understanding? Tell me. Dhvani. Repeat. Dhvani. He is not understanding dhvani. Then this second person says, you fellow stupid, I have to tell you everything in vachya. Okay? Stupids need vachya. Only intelligent people understand dhvani. Dhvani is for intelligent audience by intelligent speakers. Okay. Vachya is by stupid speakers for stupid audience. Or sometimes intelligent speakers need vachya for stupid audience. If the audience is stupid, even intelligent person has to use vachya. So, I used these examples to make all of you use the words vachya and dhvani in your day-to-day communication from today. Okay? In your classroom, outside the classroom, among yourselves, you have to say, hey, that's a good dhvani. Dhvani, huh? Oh, very good dhvani, huh? Okay? Keep using these words. And you need vachya. Why should I use vachya for you? Okay? Vachya, dhvani, these two. Now, stories are communicating statecraft through Vachya or Dhvani? Tell me. Dhvani. But there are sections inside the book which are Vachya also. How? For example, in Sabha Parva, before the Sabha, before the Rajasuya Yaga, during the Rajasuya Yaga, Narada teaches Rajadharma to Yudhishthira. In Shanti Parva, Bhishma teaches Rajadharma to Yudhishthira. In Udyoga Parva, Vidura teaches Rajadharma to Dhritarashtra. Okay, so in these sections there is a direct Upadesha of statecraft that is in a Vachya form. Vachya, direct way of communication. Okay, so these Vachya sections are Shastra sections, the Dhvani sections are Katha sections. But Dhvani section also is communicating Shastra only. Shastra only is being communicated through Dhvani. Okay? So this balance between Dhvani and Vachya, it has to be done in a very balanced way. They have to be interwoven cleverly. Mahabharata and all Itihasa Puranas are this Ubhaya technique. Ubhaya means both ways. Dhvani, Vachya, Katha, Shastra. Dhvani plus Vachya, Katha plus Shastra is called Ubhaya technique. They are called Ubhaya Kavyas. Katha Kavya plus Shastra Kavya. If a book has both the features of Katha Kavya and Shastra Kavya, that book is called Ubhaya Kavya. Okay? So Mahabharata is an Ubhaya Kavya. And all Itihasa Puranas are also Ubhaya Kavyas. All the Itihasa Puranas are Ubhaya Kavyas. They have both the techniques. Dhvani, Vachya, Katha and Shastra. Both. Statecraft it is there in the Vedas. There is a Rashtra Sukta. You know, in Vedas, the mantras are called Suktas. One eulogy, one praise is called Sukta. And there are Suktas about many different things. Prithvi Sukta is there. There is a Sukta on the earth. There is Mantra Pushpa, which is a Sukta on water. There is different topics are there. One of them is Rashtra Sukta. That is Sukta on nation. So, those people who say nation is a word which has come newly, let them read Rashtra Sukta. What is there in Rashtra Sukta? Okay, and there are descriptions, analysis of Samiti. Group of people, committee forms, they administer a village, administer a group of people, that is called Samiti. And this word Samiti gets repeated in the Vedas. And in some place, Samiti has to be Samani, it is said, right? And you have praise for the Samiti. And there is Sabha. And in contemporary times also, during the Vedic rituals, they say Sabhayai Namaha, and Sabha Dakshina is also there. For the Sabha, Dakshina is given. An amount of gift is given for being members of that committee, members of the Sabha, members of the audience. Samaj is different. Samaj is not there in the Vedic concordances, in the Vedic vocabulary. And Samaj originally in the ancient times was used as the word for auditorium, art auditorium. That is why the audience of art, the performances were called Samajikas. The word Samaj for society is a different metaphor, it's a connotation. But Samaj originally meant auditorium of artistic performances. So now in one form or the other, the point is that there is a discussion of groups, there is a discussion of organizing committees, there is a discussion of the leader of the organizing committee, how he has to organize all these things. The entire administrative setup in some form or the other is discussed in the Vedas. That is the point. Swami Dayananda Saraswati, the founder of Arya Samaj, he wrote a book called Rigvedadi Bhashya Bhumika. Okay, Rigvedadi Bhashya Bhumika. In the second bullet, you have RBHBH. RBHBH means Rigvedadi Bhashya Bhumika. Let me tell you, friends, whatever you opinion you have about Swami Dayananda Saraswati or his stand about Vedas or whatever, he is the first one during modern times who argued for the existence of scientific knowledge in the Vedas. He is the one who brought out various sciences in the Vedas in Rigvedadi Bhashya Bhumika. It is he who talked about astronomy in the Vedas in that section, in Rigvedadi Bhashya Bhumika. He talks about various Adityas. He talks about the roundness of the space, roundness of astronomical space, everything. There is a huge section in Rigvedadi Bhashya Bhumika by Swami Dayananda Saraswati which talks about the astronomical knowledge in the Vedas. We are all talking about astronomical knowledge in the Vedas now. There is one Dr. B.G. Siddhartha of Birla Science Museum in Hyderabad who has a fascination for this astronomical study of the Rigvedic mantras. There are many like that all over India who are interested in astronomical aspects of Vedic mantras. Beautiful. But the person who started that kind of a discussion was Swami Dayananda Saraswati during 19th century in his Rigvedadi Bhashya Bhumika. As part of the same book, he talks about political science and public administration inside Rigveda, inside Rigveda mantras. And from then onwards, various authors went on showing how various political science aspects, governance aspects, state aspects are discussed in Vedic mantras. Many of them are followers of Arya Samaj, some of them are followers of Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo is the next person then to Swami Dayananda Saraswati who brought out science aspects from the Vedas beautifully. So, after Sri Aurobindo, his followers and Kapali Shastri, Kavyakanta Ganapati Muni, all these followers of Sri Aurobindo, they also brought out the science aspects of Vedas. So, as part of that discussion, they also discussed about statecraft, political science and public administration in the Vedic mantras. So, then we come to the focus in Itihasas and Puranas on Rajavamshas and Rishivamshas. Purana is defined as Panchalakshanam. It has to have 5 features, they said. What did they say? They said it has to have Sargascha, Pratisargascha, Vamsham, Manmantaranicha, Vamshanucharitam Chaiva, Puranam Panchalakshanam. Puranas have 5 qualities, 5 features. One is it has to discuss creation. Sarga. Sarga is creation. Pratisarga is devolution, pralaya, the counter of creation. This is unique of India, the cyclic time concept. You don't have in Semitic religions, Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, they do not have cyclic time concept. Because modern sciences have borrowed everything from Semitic religions only, modern science also does not have cyclic time concept. It has got a linear time concept only. But Buddhism, Jainism and Vedic religion, all the 3 dharmic traditions of India, they have cyclic time concept. You might have watched in Buddhist monasteries that there are certain rolling objects and everyone who goes, touches them, it turns, it rotates. This is Kala Chakra. That concept is called Kala Chakra. One Professor David Regal from United States, he spent all his time studying only this Kala Chakra concept of Buddhism. And that's such a fascinating concept of Kala Chakra. You have the spokes of the wheel, that is Kala Chakra again. And Mahabharata begins with this Kala Chakra. The very beginning of Mahabharata begins with the concept of Kala Chakra. And not only Kala Chakra, in the Pitika part of it in the beginning, there is this Uttankopakhyaana. In that, Uttanka, the sage, encounters a vision, a dream-like experience while standing like this, daytime dream-like experience, which is because of the mantra, because of the spell. And in that also he finds a chakra. And then he goes back to his guru, Paila, and he asks him, "Sir, what is this? I found a wheel with many spokes that was turning." Then the guru says, "That is Kala Chakra." So this cyclic time, Kala Chakra, is very, very important for us. Professors of history of religion all over the world, particularly Professor Mircea Eliade, who is the guru of gurus of history of religions in United States, beautifully he writes books like Myth of the Eternal Return, all these books. That Professor Mircea Eliade is the one to whom we have to give credit to show to the world that cyclic time is a very important contribution of the Indians, of the Oriental people to the whole world, and he explains it from the Jungian perspective, Jungian psychoanalytical perspective. So those of you who are interested in understanding that concept, cyclic time concept, from a modern anthropological psychoanalytical perspective, Professor Mircea Eliade, Mircea, Mircea, Eliade, Eliade, Eliade. It's so unfortunate that studying from such great gurus like Professor Mircea Eliade, all these Wendy Donigers and Sheldon Pollocks, they studied under him. They sat in his classes. They have turned like this now. When we talk about Wendy Donigers and Sheldon Pollocks, people think that we are against America itself. Why should we be against America? We have respect for all these great gurus like Professor Mircea Eliade. Actually, they have helped us to be able to communicate to the whole world our concepts. Okay, scientifically, from a cultural anthropological perspective or any other way. So they are also there. We can study such books and be able to communicate to the world certain things. And we have our own way of communicating Kala Chakra, but we need some via media persons, via media professors. These are Professor Mircea Eliade talks about it. Kala Chakra, cyclic time concept. So while defining Purana itself, we defined it as the book which has to talk, which should talk, which talks about Kala Chakra, Sarga Pratisarga, creation and devolution. And then the book deals with, Puranas deal with Vamsham, lineages. Manvantarani. Manvantara is again a cyclic time concept. Manvantara means one cycle from Krita Yuga to Kali Yuga. Most of you probably heard these words, Krita Yuga, Kali Yuga, right? So, from Krita Yuga to Kali Yuga, and then from Kali Yuga to Krita Yuga, there is a cycle. One such cycle is called one Manvantara. Okay? Krita Yuga, then what? Treta Yuga, then what? Dvapara Yuga, then what? Kali Yuga. Okay? So, Krita Yuga is the yuga where dharma, order, was 100%. They use the word 4 padas. Pada literally means feet. 4 padas, 4 feet. So they think that there is a cow called dharma which has 4 padas. Actually, pada there means quarter. 4 padas means 4 quarters. 425%, 100%. So, dharma standing on 4 padas means 100% dharma. Treta Yuga, the word Treta itself has got 3 in it, right? You are able to understand. So, 3 quarters. Metaphorically, image wise, they tell you that the dharma cow is walking on its 3 legs, they say. Actually, it means 3 quarters of dharma, 75% of dharma. Dvapara, the word is dva, already 2. So, 2 quarters, 50% dharma. Then Kali Yuga, the word Kali means pollution. Kali Yuga means pollution age. We are already able to see that. Kali Yuga is age of pollution. But there they used the word Kali, pollution, not in the sense of air pollution or sound pollution or any such thing. It is a spiritual pollution. It is a dharma pollution. It is a supernatural pollution that they are talking about. So, in that sense, they called it Kali pollution yuga. Okay. So, in this yuga, dharma is only 25%. That is, cow of dharma is walking on one leg, they say. These are all metaphors, just images. So, that one cycle has to be discussed in a Purana, Manvantara. Then the fifth one is Vamshanucharitam. Vamshanucharitam means taking one particular Vamsha, one particular figure and discussing his own story, complete story like Rama's story, Ramayana. Okay. So, within this, Vamsha discussion happens in Itihasa. This is what they said. Itihasas have Vamsha discussion, lineage discussion. So, because Mahabharata is being considered as Itihasa, so for children, not for the elders, among the three famous books of India, Mahabharata is called Itihasa, Ramayana is called Kavya, Bhagavata is called Purana. Okay? So, Mahabharata Itihasa is discussing Vamsha Charita. Which Vamsha Charita? Chandra Vamsha Charita. Chandra Vamsha Charita is being discussed. What is Chandra Vamsha? It is a dynasty of royal people, king people. But if you go to Puranas, there are Rishi Vamshas that are discussed also. Actually, in fact, in Mahabharata itself, in the very beginning, in the Adi Parva itself, Bhrigu Vamsha is discussed. To talk about Ruru, for example, Ruru happens to be a character of Adi Parva. While talking about Ruru, you heard this word Ruru? You must hear about him. Ruru, are you Ruru? Why you should hear about him, He was a great lover. How great a lover? His wife Pramadvara died of snake bite. Then he went to Rishi, door to door, asking to revive her from death. Rishi said, we cannot. But there was a voice from the sky which said, Ruru, you are a Bhriguvamsha person, that is why you yourself have the power to revive your lover. Then he said, how? You can donate your 50% of your longevity to her, then she will get revived. He donated 50% of his longevity to the lover and Pramadvara got revived. Is there a greater lover than this? Can I ask any lover now, give your health, give your longevity, donate it, he will give? People say there are pativratas, right? But there are patni vratas like this. There are many patni vratas in the Puranas. Ruru is one of the patni vratas. Pramadvara. Pramadvara. Shall I write? Is there a pen? Yeah. Okay. So, if someone wants a beautiful love story for a kavya, Ruru Charitra is a beautiful topic, right? In fact, a person in Telugu literature in modern times, one author called Vishwanatha, he wrote a book called Ruru Charitramu as a kavya. Beautiful kavya. What a great lover, right? Patni Vratas. There are many Patni Vrata stories from among all Itihasas and Puranas. People did not bring them out because they wanted all women only to be Pativratas. They did not want Patni Vrata husbands. But Patni Vrata husbands are advised by Itihasas and Puranas. जोरू का गुलाम होना चाहिए. Itihasas and Puranas ask you to be Joru ka gulam. I am a proud Joru ka gulam. That Rajesh Khanna, there is a movie called Joru ka gulam. जोरू का गुलाम होना चाहिए, ये इतिहास और पुराण बताते हैं. और पत्नी व्रत है, राम एक पत्नी व्रत था. एक को रिमूव कर दीजिए, पत्नी व्रत हो जाता है, राइट. राम wept and wept and wept only for Sita. Ram roamed and roamed and roamed only for Sita. He is a patni vrata, right? So there are huge number of patni vratas all over Itihasas and Puranas. For boys sitting here, become Joru ka gulam. This is what Itihasas and Puranas are advising you. Ruru is from there, and Ruru is a Bhruguvamsha Sanjata. Is Bhruguvamsha Sanjata. In that Adiparva, they say that because Bhrigu was so great, Chavana, all of you eat Chavana Prasha, no, for Ayurvedic Lehya. This Chavana Prasha is named after Chavana. Chavana was a rishi. Chavana was a Bhrugu's lineage person. That is why Chavana Prasha is so powerful. Bhruguvamsha is a powerful lineage, right? And if you read that story, you will understand why Chavana Prasha is so powerful. Chavana was in the womb of his mother. At that time, one Rakshasa comes and kidnaps the lady on a pig. He becomes a pig and kidnaps the lady. And Chavana gets aborted from the womb and then comes out and looks at the Rakshasa. Just from the fire of his looks, the Rakshasa gets burnt. So, just aborted fetus opening the eyes and looking at the Rakshasa kills the Rakshasa. That is Chavana. That is why you have to use Chavana Prasha. Okay, just got out, looked at, Rakshasa get burned. Your cold, your viruses, all these are Rakshasas only. You understand? These words like Chavan, all these things are used symbolically. They are used indirectly. Is Bhruguvamsha Sanjata. Okay, so that Bhruguvamsha is discussed. Various Rishi Vamshas are discussed in Mahabharata. So Mahabharata also is Rajavamsha, Rishi Vamsha, Charitra. All Puranas are like that. In all Puranas, Rajavamshas and Rishi Vamshas are discussed. Why only Rajavamshas are not, Rishi Vamshas are not Chettiyars? Why not P. Chidambaram? Chettiyar. Why not Reddiyars? Gali Janardhan Reddy. Why not? Why any other? Only why Raja and Rishi Vamshas? This is discussed in the next slides. I am going to tell you why only Raja and Rishi is discussed. Rajavamshas and Rishi Vamshas are discussed. But Puranas have this Rajavamsha, Rishi Vamsha discussion. When we say Vamsha Charitra, it is Rajavamsha and Rishi Vamsha discussion in Itihasas and Puranas. And the title of this slide is Statecraft. So we are saying because both Rajavamshas and Rishi Vamshas are discussed, Raja becomes the focus. Because Raja becomes the focus, statecraft becomes the focus. In all the Itihasas and Puranas, because Raja is discussed, focus on Raja brings statecraft. Raja and Rajya are both discussed in Ubhaya technique, that is Dhvani technique and Vachya technique, Katha technique and direct Rajadharma Upadesha technique. Now, Vamshanucharitam. Let me write. Sargascha pratisargascha Vamsham manvantarani cha Vamshanucharitam chaiva Puranam Panchalakshanam. Yes, lineage. Lineage is both Raja and Rishi Vamshas. Manvantaram. Manvantara is one cycle from Krita Yuga to Kali Yuga. The fifth one is Vamshanucharitam. Vamshanucharitam means according to the lineage, one particular figure is focused, like Rama or anyone. So it's almost that Purana has Itihasa inherent in it. Itihasa is part of Purana because Itihasa is Vamshacharita and that Vamshacharita is part of Purana. Itihasa is part of Purana only. Okay. So Mahabharata is actually an elaborated Purana. One Vamshacharita is elaborated in it. So now this slide, focus on Raja Rajya. It is done in Ubhaya technique in all the Itihasas and Puranas. That is why statecraft is focused in the Veda, Puranas and Itihasas. Now, why statecraft has to be discussed in Itihasas and Puranas and Mahabharata and how is it discussed? Did you get any idea? What is the purpose? How did it come? Why they have to discuss? So, they did not have dictionary entries like today Raja Dharma, tomorrow biology, next day commerce, next corporate governance. No, it is Raja Dharma, Rishi Dharma discussion. As part of that, Raja discussed, Rajya is discussed, as part of that, statecraft is discussed. Understand now? Okay.